So there's all kinds of little things that we can talk about here today, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through a farm transaction from a brokerage standpoint, listing or selling the farm, and some of the issues that we have to deal with when we do that. And then we're going to transition into the farm management side and do the same thing. And so once again, if there's anything you want to add to it, you do have, I've put together a little bit of information sheets for you there. And the interesting part to me is, as I started to do some research on this, there are 74,600 farms in the state of Illinois, and they average 357 acres each. And almost 90% of this land is used to raise crops. So it's kind of an interesting aspect. And the other thing that I think that really hit home to me was the fact that our industry, agriculture in general, in the state of Illinois, the top industry is agriculture. And it's nearly a $9 billion a year industry. And there's 1.5 million people employed because of agriculture in Illinois. So it means something, and what we do means something. So I think that part of it's interesting, and we can hang on to that and know that what we do is important. So with that, I want to get started. The first section that we're going to talk about is farm brokerage. And when we talk about farm property and those considerations, and the first thing I want to talk about, of course, is soil type. And so the format I'm going to kind of go here with is that, I'm going to throw out a question maybe to our panel up here. And by the way, we need to introduce our panel, and I'm just going to pass it on down. So.
Luke Worrell with Worrell Land Services in Jacksonville, Illinois. I'm going to stay ahead of the comments. Yes, we all are dressed the same. That was not planned. Dave and I actually have the exact same shirt on. But we'll do the best we can, and happy to be here and be involved.
Ray Brownfield, owner and managing broker of Land Pro LLC in Oswego, and happy to be here. And I've got the biggest pin because I'm the oldest. Okay.
He's also the biggest dog in the show here. So, my name's Dave Klein, and I'm with First Mid Ag Services. I'm managing broker in Bloomington, Illinois.
Okay, very good. Okay, first thing I want to talk about, of course, is soil type. Soil types, we know that everything, or a lot of the way that we value farms and things like that come back to soil type. So the first thing, and one of the things that I learned in my little research on all of this, there are 1,500 different soil types in the state of Illinois, and that actually have a designated name and a productivity index attached to it. So first thing I want to talk about, or have you guys explain, is what exactly is a productivity index, and how do they compute that? So,
Well, the PI, as it's called, Productivity Index, is graded on every soil in Illinois, whether you're up north of Chicago or down south. And it's a way that we classify soils and its propensity to handle water and to grow a crop. So it's one of the best ways that we can analyze sales, that we can analyze productivity, and really do a case-by-case analysis on a farm.
okay, the other question that kind of comes out of that then, do you use PI or that productivity index even when you're managing farms, right?
We do, and one thing I want to add to what Luke said, what we've learned in taking listings is that many of the absentee landowners don't understand what PI is. So the first thing I think you need to do is educate both sides. Most of the buyers do know today, most of the farmers and investors do, but a lot of people from out of the area have no clue, and I always say it's an index. It's not a yield. That doesn't mean if it's a 147, which is the best we can get, that it produces that kind of a yield. It is an index, to keep that in mind. So it's a ratio of index that we deal with, as Luke just said. We use it in many ways. In farm management, it gets down into, and it doesn't include drainage, so you got to think about that. But when we're computing what kind of rent we should get, certainly there's analysis between PI and maybe what the productivity should be for rental. Now, there's a lot of variables, and you guys all know that. But it's a basis, I suppose, because as we always say, everything's under the land. You can't change that land much into what it was the glaciers did for us here in Illinois, other than the fact that the PI is what it is, and the University of Illinois and NRCS did a really good job. It's very helpful to us in our business.
I don't know a whole lot to add to that. The PI was derived from Bulletin 811, which was put out by the University of Illinois, and so they were the ones that established this indexing system that we have everything based upon, on each soil type. They went up and analyzed each soil type in the state of Illinois.
The next topic that I want to bring up is topography and the field shape, or the shape of the field. And one of the things that I've noticed over the last few years, you know, it used to be, it was a lot easier to sell a 20 or a 40 just because of the amount of money involved. But now there's a big change in that. And if you guys want to talk about especially like the size of fields and how that can affect value.
Sure, I think, you know, nowadays with modern equipment, it's much larger, so it can be a little cumbersome to take your modern day equipment to you know, farm, let's say, a patchy 10 acres that you have to meander through a small wooded lane to get to. And so as time has gone on and as the industry has changed, certainly topography, or, you know, the shape of a farm and its fields can play a big difference, because not every operation is suited to handle every type of farm. And so there's a number of variations that take hold in that.
And if you want to add, just generally speaking, and I mean, it may be anecdotal or just from your experience, but to sell a 20-acre field compared to an 80, is there a significant difference in how you would price those, or maybe be able to price them?
I think, you know, more so the price, I think it might just limit the number, as values have gone up historically. I think it's potentially, the larger the farm is, you are working with a limited buyer pool, because not everybody can particularly, you know, handle 100 acres at $12,000 an acre. Now, I will say, at least in my area, that the smaller farms sometimes, you know, can have a higher per acre cost, just simply because there are more potential buyers in the door.
Okay.
Well, you know, auctions are a good indication of this. If you got a 20 or a 40 or an 80, that's, again, it's where it's located. Location is what this business is all about. And particularly today, I think we see that. So if you've got a 20, 40, or an 80 or whatever, yeah, the dollar amount involving any lending is less, obviously, so you can have more buyers. But it's probably, if it's next door to somebody wants it, they might even pay a premium, because it is more attainable for them. They can maybe come up with the cash, and for less encumbrance on the mortgage side. So we see that in many cases, where not always big is always better in those particular cases.
And to, I guess, to go maybe an opposite direction with this, sometimes the larger operations, from a field efficiency and a time efficiency standpoint, the amount of time they have to spend coming in and out, putting headlands in on a 40-acre farm might be the same amount of time they put headlands in on an 80-acre farm or 160-acre farm, or close to that. And so as a result, it's just more efficient. Once they get in the field and get that 36-row planter rolling, they want to keep it going back and forth and not stop. And so field size, field shape, and those types of things become, any kind of hindrance that makes them turn around, point rows, all become an issue for field efficiency. And the more efficient they can be with the fields they're working with, the more acres they can cover and be more productive with their equipment.
Kind of along those same lines too, do you think it has an effect with your institutional investor type buyers? Do they tend to want bigger tracts, I would say?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've definitely, transactional cost is the same whether it's a 40 or 4,000 acres. So we find that our institutional investors, which we have an opportunity to represent one of them out there today, and Not that they want to go huge, they really don't necessarily want to do, they're always thinking about exit strategy. So you could get big enough, is it divisible? Is it something that could be divided easily if they decided to take an 800-acre farm and sell it in 200-acre tracts or whatever? So that's something pretty important to them. But yeah, 40 probably not, and 80 probably not. However, if it's nearby, something they've already attained, yeah, they might be a buyer in that particular case. That's, okay.
Okay, and now drainage. It's huge. I mean, I know in our area it is. And I think a lot of that, and you know, as I researched this a little bit, not only because of the way that the way the glaciers worked and dumped all this topsoil on us, but a lot of it was mucky, dark, and you know, a class that I took way back when I was in college many, many years ago on geology and things like that, that actually there's kind of a triangle that was the last settled part of Illinois. Of course, early on, everybody went to where there was rivers because if there was water. But there's a triangular area that more or less covers from like Kankakee down to Terre Haute and comes to a point maybe just a little west of Decatur. And at that triangle shape, where that was actually the last ground or land that was settled in Illinois. And because it was known for tall tree, not very many trees, not very many rivers in it, and it had prairie grasses that were 8 or 10 feet tall. And so and it was real mucky. And so until we got the opportunity to be able to till that type of ground and work it and drain it, that's when it became very, very productive. So can we talk a little bit about drainage and specifically those issues that come because a lot of our ground, farmland, is within drainage districts, or maybe they're not. But of course, a lot of acres in Illinois have drainage systems in them, or some part of that. But then you still have the worry of where do I get rid of that water? So if you want to talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, I just came back from a national conference where people are desperately like wanting water and trying to get water, and here in Illinois we're trying to move it off as quickly as we can. And so a farm's ability to handle precipitation, you know, is directly correlated to its yield potential, and then in essence makes it a more attractive piece and therefore more valuable. So, you know, as time has gone on and as technology has improved and we're able to install a lot more field tile and help with drainage, that can be a huge benefit to a farm's value. With that, the more complex a strategy or drainage system is, you obviously need an outlet somewhere to take that water, and that's where sometimes it can get a little interesting, because a lot of times you'll need participation or cooperation from a neighbor, which you would like to think is always there, but that isn't always the case. But certainly, the better that a farm can drain the water, the better it can yield, the more money it's worth. I also think it's interesting, and it's become such a hot topic, is because it's definitely not a cheap endeavor to have a large scale tiling system, or pattern tile as it's called, when you have you know, certain amounts of laterals, you know, 30 to 40 to 50 feet, and sometimes in some instances even narrower than that. So it is a big issue, and something that's worth noting.
You know, one of the interesting things too that I was doing a little bit of research on was the law dealing with drainage. And of course, I think we all know that, and this is where this servient tenement and dominant tenement come into play, going back to more real estate concepts. But, you know, of course, is when you have surface drainage is blocking that flow, natural flow of water, and we want to talk about that a little bit. I think that's kind of an interesting component.
Well, yeah, so the flow of water cannot be blocked by someone below them. So it needs to be allowed to be able to take its course of action that it would naturally take to seek the lower space so they could exit. So therefore, the person above is the dominant tenement in this case, whereas the person below is the servient one, and they have to accept that water, so you cannot block drainage from occurring. And you also, if you're looking to outlet, get rid of the water, in that same regard, you have to be able to allow that person to do so. So is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, because I know that there are laws on the books about that kind of stuff.
Well, though I think all of you that manage farms have been involved as long as I have in many cases, but you remember when there used to be fences and people plowed up and they plowed a fence. So that created a natural ridge line, right? In many cases it did. Now, over the years, the farmers, the owners got together and said, all right, let's get rid of that fence row. And all at once, the ridge was no longer there. So what water had been maybe supposed to go this way was going down the ridge line this way. All at once, now it goes its natural course. So you see that, and from time to time I've run into cases where that still is there. And you're going, okay, what do we do about that? And because the other guy doesn't want to take your water too bad either. He really doesn't. Well, legally he's supposed to, but he really doesn't want it too bad. So those are issues we have to think about as we're managing and also doing brokerage work. How are you going to make this better? I mean, what can it do? And it takes a lot of cooperation amongst people. And as you pointed out, Luke, there's some feelings, not as bad as they used to be. Years ago, there was fights, like fence fights. There's fights over drainage as well. Today, hopefully it's moderated a little bit.
And once again, I think our role a lot of times is to mediate those kind of disputes
If we can.
and work through them. So I think we all understand how much, when we list or sell a farm, how much drainage can make a big difference.
Oh, it's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge.
And, and whether or not there is a drainage commission set up or a district, and all of those things play into how you price properties and go from there. So it's interesting, once again, this is kind of anecdotal, but if you had two identical farms from a PI standpoint, one that was well drained and one that wasn't, what kind of percentage difference do you think it would be in the price?
I'm really regretting sitting next to you. As I get the microphone first.
You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna switch this
it around.
around.
Okay.
That's why I put you there.
That's what I think.
Oh, Dave just asked for the mic, so there.
I'll take it. Okay, that's fine. So a lot of that difference in value comes down to, can I drain
Right.
Yeah.
the wet property? So, and what would that cost? Is there an outlet for it? And what would it cost to get to that outlet? So as a result, it's kind of a trick question a little bit, because it could be.
That's why I asked it.
Right, it could be worth similar, but it's going to probably have something to do with the difference in the cost to drain that property
Right.
to make it equal to the
That's right.
other property.
Good. I'm gonna give you an example. I think one of your brokers, I talked to today about it, Ross.
Yeah.
Some of you know I've got a listing up in Woodford County, and it's 139.5 PI. That's a Class A. But it's got a little drainage issue on the southwest corner, and everybody knows it. It's one of those cases where 160 acres right across the road was pattern tile. Well, guess where they drained it? Right onto this little piece of ground. And there's not adequate tile right now to drain it where it needs to go, and it's going over the surface. And everybody just says, oh, God, we got it listed at 10.9, and it's way, way too much. And I said, all right, we're gonna rate it down to 10.5. Well, so what I did last Friday, I just put my farm manager hat on. I said, I'm gonna go see a Tyler. And a guy named Buzz Bender, somebody might know him over there. Ray said, that can be cured. And I did the calculations for about another $200 an acre, maybe $250 at most, that can be cured. So there's your cost to cure. You still got a Class A farm, so okay, maybe it's a 10,250 now, but sure not 9,000. And so those are things sometimes we have to look at and say, what is the issue here? And be a little more proactive if you can figure out, you can't guarantee that's gonna be the cost, but it's gonna be pretty close. So I thought that was kind of an interesting issue of the differential between a really nice farm that had some drainage issues.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, kind of repetitive at this point. They did a good job. It's hard to put a hard, tangible number on the difference in value. And sometimes it can be substantial, because there are those instances where there just simply isn't a great answer for drainage issues. And it's kind of one of those things where sometimes in this industry you get a call about selling 100 acres and you look it up on the plat map real quick, and then you hurry up and you look at an aerial, and then you hurry up and you look at the soils map and you're like, oh, this is, these are one of the days you're really excited about. And then your enthusiasm is dampered just a bit as you get the drone in the air, or you start looking at Google Earth, historical images, because it's not always how it appears on paper. And you'll notice pretty quick if a farm has drainage issues come spring and summertime.
Let me point out something too here that you've all found, and I found this when the 1031 market was coming out of the northern suburbs of Kendall and DuPage County, and these guys had different soils up there and they wanted to go downstate. We want it flat black, no ditches. You ever hear that? And I said, I come from flat black where I was born and raised, and I said, there's not much fall to get tile to drain. Ditches are very important. Well, you can't make money off of a ditch. I said, well, yes, you do, because you control your own outlet. You don't have to get permission from Mr. Neighbor who may not want you to go across it. And I had a heck of a time selling that idea. Or waterways. We don't want any waterways. Well, there's enough slope on that farm. It probably naturally drains pretty good. It could take some tile here and there. So it's a sales process of how people do want. In the day, you get them what they want, obviously, but it's just things you run into out there.
Yeah, and once again, I know in our particular area, tile, and how many of you would like to have $5 for every time you were talking to someone about a farm and they go, it's wet?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Oh, that's a wet farm. I don't want that, it's not worth that because it's a wet farm.
Yeah.
But the whole point of it is a key issue, and we all know that. Now, for the next fun area that we want to talk about, improvements. And I think there is a distinction, and obviously, between investor buyers with improvements and maybe an operator that may have improvements. And of course, improvements, and we talked about that a lot this morning, go all the way from a residential to farm buildings that provide that contribute to the farming operations, grain bins, everything else. So typically, when you're listing a farm, what is some of the analysis that you have to go through when you start talking about these improvements?
I think, firstly, unfortunately, yes, they're called improvements, but a lot of times, unfortunately, they bring a negative value to a farm depending on what they are. We touched a little bit on this earlier when we were talking about topography and modern equipment. The simple fact is that, most, whether it's a grain bin, a harvest store, a shed, a lean-to, anything that is probably 20 years or older probably doesn't have much value and can be quite problematic. There's if you drive around the country, it's littered with, old livestock facilities, lean-tos, the old governmental grain bins that hold just a handful, thousand of bushels, and so
He's talking about my house.
I'm getting there, right? So yeah, the first thing is you need to make sure exactly what do they bring anything to the table, and if they do, then how can you hopefully magnify that when you try to either improve a farm as a manager or sell a farm as a real estate broker. Okay. The other thing that I'm rambling, I should probably pass the mic.
Oh, you're fine.
Another thing too, a lot of times you see that's you always kind of get antsy about is the old abandoned farmhouse, and unfortunately there's a number of those around. And I recall one specifically on the farm management side. It had been abandoned for decades, and you're still paying a little bit of tax on it since it's there, just minimal, but you want it gone. There's Class A soils underneath, and I remember calling, because I had always heard the story growing up that you could get volunteer fire departments to have like a practice burn. And so I called 3 local fire departments, and just in this day and age, there's too much red tape. Nobody wanted to do it. And then I get a call one morning, and the house had burned down.
Oh my.
And my,
Yes!
beds.
My first
How
reaction
many
is,
matches did it take?
my first reaction is, I'm a suspect. I've been calling every fire department trying to get this house burned down. So the owner lives in Virginia, the state of Virginia. So I drive out there on a Saturday morning and I'm taking pictures. And I'm just dressed casually. And then the fire, like the arson investigation unit pulls up. So there I am again taking pictures of a house I've been begging people to burn down. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times these old houses can be problematic, and if anything, it can be a negative attribute, whether you're managing it or trying to market it.
Okay. Would either one of you guys want to address like grain bins and grain facilities?
I can talk about grain bins. Depends again on their size and a lot of things. Grain bins today, we're seeing more obsolescence on how grain handling systems are taken care of. How's the concrete? What kind of floor does it have on it? Does it have a good aeration system? Does it have a dryer system? I'm seeing, and this depends on the size, it really does, like the old government bins, we're not seeing as many of those, but we're still seeing some old BS&B bins and things like that go back 25 or 30 years, and I'm beginning to see a little or less use of those in many cases. Maybe you are too. They're going either a larger facility, or they're going directly to town. It's a smaller unloading system, maybe only an 8-inch or whatever. It just doesn't get them to the capacity that they need to move the grain in which they want. So in many cases, we're seeing that more as a detriment these days.
Yeah, especially if it's on a particular farm. I guess what we're seeing is a lot of farmers who do want to have grain storage, want to have it all at one location. They want to make it larger and be able to handle more identity preserved grain in some cases. And so that may be some use that they may take a grain bin from another farm and move it. If they want to do that, or otherwise they just build it on their own and there's not a lot of value to it on that farm. And in fact, even this spring, I've sold a couple of grain bins off some farms for guys to take, just because the tenant that I had doesn't want to use it, the owner doesn't want it, and we found someone who would take it and clean it up. And so as a result, we're able to get rid of it that way. As far as other improvements, there's the thing about improvements we always worry about are environmental concerns. Is there asbestos?
Exactly.
Is there
Hog confinement.
well, hog confinement, yeah.
Underground storage.
Underground storage tanks,
Uncapped wells.
uncapped wells, and things of that nature. Lead-based paint. So all those types of items come into play with farmsteads that can be a liability almost more than an asset, unless it's in really good shape.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a limited market. Sometimes we've taken over a couple farms for investors and they said, well, can you sell off the house and buildings? And we've done that. And I'll be very honest with you, that's not the kind of business I run. So I'll go with another local broker in the area that does residences and farmsteads. It's a much easier thing for me to do. They're higher qualified than we are. And we work with them very closely, and it has worked fairly well in doing that if we need to do it.
I think that's a great point that Ray just brought up too, is a lot of times, you know, if it's a quality farm but it happens to have a house on it, it's going to be hard to find someone who's really interested in the farmland, who's going to put almost any value on the house, because they're in it for the land. So in some instances, if, you know, the farm lays the right way, you can extract value by trying to parcel off the house. Now, you know, that's in a perfect world, it doesn't always work, but that's something I almost always look into when I see a really nice, you know, 200 acres, oh, and then it's got this, you know, home site. I immediately think if there's a way to maybe go about this in two different avenues.
And that's interesting because, and you know, once again, and I think Ray really brought up a great point. As much as we fear, being farm brokers, fear the residential agent that comes in with no knowledge of anything about farms or how to do it and those kind of things. And then we have that same problem on the other side. So I think Ray brought up a great point. Refer it out, let a residential broker handle it, and I think it'll make your life a lot easier. Because, you know, there are disclosure issues that you have to worry about with lead-based paint almost always, because the houses are pre-1978, and now in Illinois we've got the seller disclosure law, and where the sellers have to make any disclosure of all known defects and things like that. And that thing really has some teeth from the aspect that if the buyer eventually they have 1 year after they close, And if they can provide proof that the seller had knowledge of a defect and failed to disclose it, the seller's liable. So those are issues. And then, of course, the radon disclosure is another issue that we have to deal with now that we really have to worry about. So strictly on the listing and the selling side, we haven't even gotten into the contract side yet, but when we talk about tenancy situations and maybe terminations of those, I'd really like to have some discussion, and we have specific law here in Illinois that ties that in, and I'm sure many of you have had some horror stories along those lines, because most generally buyers of farm properties want access to either farm it themselves or choose who they want to farm it. And of course, with our farm tenancy law, and I've included a copy of that statute within your materials, but let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime somebody's looking to buy a farm, obviously it's, more times than not, they're wanting to kind of choose its own future. They're wanting to chart its own course. And so it's can be troubling sometimes if the farm you're trying to sell is encumbered or under an existing lease, and it's especially problematic if that lease isn't overly advantageous to the bottom line. And so a lot of times, tenancy in a way, a lot of these negotiations with the farm almost can sometimes become a two-way negotiation. Sometimes you're not only negotiating price, you're negotiating tenancy, lease terms. And so, as far as horror stories, thankfully, I don't really have any that are great. You guys?
Because I think one of the things we deal with, or we have, and I think they're maybe subsiding, but was the fact that many times when these farms were being operated by an operator and their family had been on that farm operating it for 50 years or 100 years or whatever, and there's no written lease, it's just an oral year-to-year lease, and that's where I think you end up with a lot of problems, and I think Dave might have.
So, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I probably have had several situations where people have called me and said, I want to sell my farm, and my next question is, what is the status of your lease?
Exactly.
And they say, well, it's verbal. Well, it's also December 15th. So if it's a verbal lease in Illinois and it's December 15th, you have essentially allowed that lease to roll over for another year because under Illinois law, it's 4 months prior to the next cropping year, which is effectively March 1st. So that means it's November 1st is the last day. If it's an oral lease that's not in writing, that you can actually terminate the lease legally, unless you can get your tenant to go along with it and give it up. So that's the standard. Obviously, written leases can be at different times, but we've had that conversation several times with folks, and then even during the summer, we'll have people call us and say, well, I want to sell my farm. Well, what's the status of your lease? Well, it's leased on a crop share lease with my Uncle Bob. And well, Uncle Bob, he still has the lease for the rest of the year. And if you want to sell the farm, it's going to be subject to the terms of your lease. Do you have it in writing? And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But those terms then dictate, and if they don't have it in writing, it's verbal, then once again, there could be a lot of loose ends in that verbal lease that are hard to nail down unless Uncle Bob's willing to help you put something in writing so that you can help you sell the farm with a written lease.
And a lot of times Uncle Bob said, well, okay, but I'm not signing anything.
Right.
But then that causes problems with your buyer pool.
Right.
Because they want something solid.
And we've had some cases where maybe, let's say, late last summer, early fall, before any termination date, somebody comes to us and said, we're thinking about selling our farm, we're not quite sure when we're going to do it, want to talk to you about it. And we like the operator, we do like him or her, but we do want to sell it, and what do you think? And my attitude to this is, if you're going to negotiate the lease, and you want that person on for the 2019 crop year, if you think there's any chance you're going to sell it by the end of 2019, put the lease into effect, that it terminates upon completion of harvest or no later than November 15th. That way, then the buyer, during the course of the time, knows they're going to get possession for fall tillage work, And usually that has worked quite well. And if they sign, it's nothing illegal about that. If everybody says, yeah, we're fine, talk to the attorneys about it, we're fine with all that, that's maybe one way, at least to clear the way, so you don't have another carryover situation that goes into another year situation, which can happen sometimes.
Yeah, I think the possession upon harvest is kind of a common strategy, and one that more times than not you're able to work out. You know, the rare occurrence of Uncle Bob refusing to sign something. You know, a lot of times even in this day and age, or this time of year I should say, you know, if things have been, if the owner and the operator have had a great relationship, a lot of times you can, you know, work something out to get them to sign some sort of, you know, termination notice even after November 1st, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I've also seen it in the past where if it's, you know, late spring, early summer, you can negotiate a sale, and then, you know, but instead of kind of having a new owner jump on board mid-growing season, you simply can try to, you know, just delay the closing until the crops are off, and that's also one way that usually can get around quite a bit of trouble.
Okay. All good information. I tell you what, let's do right now, let's take about a 10-15 minute break and stretch our sails and